You know that moment when you realize the music you used to love, the one that used to light you up from the inside, now just sounds like organized noise. Or when you sit down to watch that show everyone is raving about and you feel absolutely nothing, not even boredom, just a kind of hollow absence where pleasure used to live. You go through the motions, you smile at the right times, you say the right things. But inside there is this growing awareness that something fundamental has shifted, and you cannot make it shift back no matter how hard you try. You have been carrying this alone, this strange grief, for a life that still exists but no longer touches you. You look around at other people laughing, celebrating, losing themselves in simple pleasures, and you wonder what happened to you. When did you become unable to just enjoy things? When did everything start feeling so distant, so empty, so utterly devoid of the joy it once held? You have tried. You have forced yourself to engage, to participate, to feel what you used to feel. You have gone back to old favorites, old comforts, thinking maybe you just need to reconnect. But it does not work. The pleasure is not hiding. It is not waiting to return. Something else is happening. Something you cannot quite name, but that fills you with a kind of quiet desperation. What I am about to share with you is not going to give you back that innocent joy, but it will help you understand what is actually occurring, why it is happening, and what this loss might be preparing you for. Because what you are experiencing is not a problem to be solved. It is a threshold you are crossing. Let me be very direct with you about what is happening. You have started seeing too much, and I do not mean this in some mystical or supernatural sense. I mean your consciousness has developed to a point where it can no longer participate in experience with the same immediacy it once had. You have become aware of the machinery of your own desire, the construction of your own pleasure, the way your mind creates meaning and then projects that meaning onto the world. And once you see this machinery operating, once you become conscious of consciousness itself, something irrevocable occurs. You create a distance between yourself and experience. It is like watching a magic trick. After the magician has explained exactly how it is done, the trick still happens. The cards still appear to vanish, the rabbit still emerges from the hat, but you cannot unsee the mechanism. You cannot restore your own wonder through willpower. This is what Hannah Arendt understood when she wrote about the life of the mind, about what happens when human beings turn their attention inward and begin to examine the very processes by which they exist and perceive. She knew that thinking, real thinking, the kind that questions and investigates and refuses easy answers, comes at a cost. The cost is innocence. The cost is the ability to simply be swept along by experience without watching yourself experience it. Most people move through life with a kind of blessed opacity to their own mental processes. They want something, they pursue it, they get it, they feel pleasure. The cycle is clean and unconscious. They do not ask why they want what they want. They do not examine the nature of the wanting itself. They do not stand back and observe the brief spike of satisfaction followed by the return to restlessness. They just live it. And in that unconscious participation, there is a real joy, a genuine engagement with the world. But something has happened to you. Maybe it was gradual, an accumulation of observations and disappointments and moments of seeing through the facades. Maybe it was sudden, a single insight that changed everything. But at some point you started watching yourself want things. You started noticing how pleasure works, how it arises, how it fades, how it always leaves you right back where you started, reaching for the next thing. You started seeing the gap between the promise of experience and the reality of it. You started recognizing the patterns, the way your mind attaches to objects and experiences, and then makes you believe that having them, or achieving them, or experiencing them, will finally give you what you are really looking for. And once you see this, once you really see it, you cannot go back to participating in it with the same enthusiasm. It is not that you have become depressed or nihilistic, though it might feel that way. It is that you have outgrown a particular mode of relating to existence. Think about what joy actually is for most people. It is the temporary forgetting of the self, the momentary dissolution of the boundary between the experiencer and the experienced. When you are truly joyful, you are not thinking about being joyful. You are not observing yourself having the experience. You are the experience. There is no gap, no space of reflection, no consciousness watching consciousness. A child running through a sprinkler on a hot summer day is not thinking about their joy. They are joy. They are the water, the coolness, the shrieking laughter. They have not yet developed the capacity to step back and watch themselves experiencing. But you have developed that capacity, and it is a profound capacity, one that is necessary for deeper understanding, for genuine wisdom, for the kind of examined life that Socrates spoke of. But it is also a capacity that makes simple joy more difficult, perhaps impossible in the way you once knew it, because now there is always a part of you standing back, observing, analyzing, seeing through the temporary nature of the pleasure, recognizing the machinery of desire and satisfaction. You watch yourself enjoying things, and that very watching prevents the full dissolution into the experience. You have become the audience to your own life. This is the paradox of consciousness developing. The more aware you become, the more you see, the more you understand about how your mind creates your reality, the harder it becomes to lose yourself in that reality. And losing yourself is what joy requires. Not permanently, not in some destructive sense, but temporarily, in the moment, in the full embrace of experience without the observer commenting on it. You cannot both fully participate and fully observe at the same time. You cannot both be the dancer and the one watching the dance. And you have become very, very good at watching. This is what I mean when I say you have started seeing too much. You see the impermanence in every moment of pleasure. You see the way your mind already starts grasping for the next thing, even while still experiencing this thing. You see the emptiness underneath the surface of desire, the way nothing actually fills the space you thought it would fill. You see other people caught in the same patterns, and you cannot help but recognize it now. You see the collective agreement to not look too closely, to keep pursuing, to keep believing that the next achievement or relationship or experience will be different, and you cannot participate in that agreement anymore. You have broken the spell. Now here is what makes this so difficult and so lonely. Our entire culture is organized around the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Every message you receive tells you that joy is found in objects, experiences, achievements, relationships. Do this, buy this, become this, find this, and you will be happy. The whole mechanism of society depends on people believing in this narrative and continuing to pursue it. So when you stop being able to feel joy from the things that are supposed to bring joy, when you look at the promised rewards and feel nothing, you think something is wrong with you. You think you are broken, you think you have lost something essential. And in a way you have. You have lost the ability to be unconscious. You have lost the innocence that allowed you to pursue pleasure without seeing the futility of the pursuit. But this loss, as painful as it is not a mistake. It is not a malfunction. It is evidence of consciousness evolving to a different level of operation. It is the natural consequence of really paying attention to your own life. Arendt wrote about the space that opens up when human beings begin to think, really think, not just process information, but examine the foundations of their own existence. She understood that this space is often experienced as a void, as a kind of death of the self that thought it knew who it was and what it wanted. When you begin to observe your own mental processes, when you start seeing through the constructions and narratives and desires that used to seem so solid and real, you lose your grip on the person you thought you were. That person wanted things, enjoyed things, moved through the world with a sense of purpose and direction. But that person was, in a sense, asleep, operating on automatic patterns, inherited desires, unexamined assumptions. And what you are experiencing now is the disorientation of waking up. Not fully awake yet, not enlightened or liberated, but no longer able to be asleep in the same way. You are in between. And this in-between space is characterized precisely by the loss of simple joy. Because simple joy requires not seeing too much. It requires a certain blindness, a certain willingness to not ask too many questions, to not look too closely at the mechanisms of desire and satisfaction. And you have lost that willingness. You cannot not see now. So what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to live when nothing brings you joy anymore? When you have seen through the pleasures that organize most people's lives? This is where most spiritual teachings fail you, because they either tell you to go back to somehow recapture innocence, to learn to enjoy simple things again, which is impossible, because you cannot unknow what you now know. Or they tell you to transcend desire entirely, to become some kind of enlightened being who is beyond pleasure and pain, which is also useless because you are a human being with a body and a nervous system that experiences pleasure and pain, whether you want it to or not. What I want to offer you instead is a different frame entirely. What if this loss of joy is not the end of something, but the beginning of something else? What if the death of pleasure-seeking is necessary for a different kind of fulfillment to emerge, one that does not depend on objects or experiences or temporary feelings? What if seeing too much is not a curse but a doorway, painful to walk through but leading somewhere you needed to go? If this perspective is opening something up for you, consider subscribing. I explore these territories every week, and I would love to have you along for the journey. Here is what I have observed, both in my own experience and in working with others who are going through this transition. When the old pleasures stop working, when you can no longer lose yourself in the pursuits that used to absorb you, you are being forced to find a different relationship with existence. Not a relationship based on getting and having and experiencing, but one based on something more fundamental. I am not talking about renunciation or asceticism or rejecting pleasure. I am talking about discovering that there is a quality of being that does not depend on anything external happening or not happening. A kind of okayness, a fundamental wholeness that exists underneath all the wanting and getting and losing. But you cannot find this quality while you are still able to distract yourself with pleasure-seeking. As long as the old strategies work, as long as you can still get hits of satisfaction from achievements or acquisitions or experiences, you will keep using those strategies. You will keep believing that fulfillment is found out there, in the world, in the next thing. The death of joy as you knew it is actually the removal of the distraction that was preventing you from discovering what you really are underneath all the wanting. Think of it this way. Your entire life, you have been like someone standing in a dark room with a flashlight, shining it on various objects, examining them, desiring them, acquiring them, losing interest, moving the light to the next object. The flashlight beam is your attention, your consciousness, and you have been completely absorbed in the objects the light reveals. This is pleasure, this is joy, this is what I want, this is what will make me happy. The objects keep changing, but the pattern stays the same. Shine light on object, desire object, pursue object, obtain object, feel brief satisfaction, return to restlessness, shine light on next object. This is how most people live their entire lives. But something has happened to you. You have started to notice not just the objects in the beam of light, but the light itself. You have started to become aware of the awareness, to recognize consciousness as distinct from its contents. And once this starts to happen, the objects lose their power, because you see that the satisfaction never came from the objects at all. It came from the momentary stilling of the mind that occurred when you obtained what you wanted. It came from the brief pause in the seeking. The object was just an excuse for the mind to rest for a moment. But the mind does not need an object to rest. That is what you are beginning to discover. And it is terrifying because it means everything you thought you knew about how to be happy is revealed as a misunderstanding. Let me be clear about something. I'm not saying that pleasure is bad or wrong or that you should not enjoy things. I am saying that when pleasure becomes impossible, when you can no longer lose yourself in pursuit and acquisition, it is because consciousness has evolved to a point where it needs to discover its own nature, rather than continuing to seek itself in objects and experiences. This is not a moral judgment. It is just what happens at a certain stage of awareness. The seeking mechanism burns itself out. You see through it. And then there is this gap, this void, where joy used to be. And in that gap, if you can stay with it, if you do not try to fill it or fix it or run from it, something else becomes available. Not a different kind of pleasure, but a different quality of existence altogether. A kind of presence, a fullness that has nothing to do with what is happening or not happening in your external life. But you cannot access this while you are still able to be distracted by pleasure. The loss of pleasure is the doorway opening. I know many of you watching this have never told anyone what you are really experiencing. You have been carrying this alone, maybe for years, thinking something is fundamentally wrong with you. But here is what I want you to understand. The moment you name this, the moment you acknowledge it out loud, even just in a comment, something shifts. You stop being alone with it. So let me ask you directly, how long have you been walking through your life feeling nothing? Watching yourself pretend to enjoy things while feeling utterly disconnected from the joy that used to come so easily? I want you to share in the comments, not because I need engagement, but because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not the only one. And if you cannot find the words right now, if it feels too heavy to articulate, just type this. This is exactly what I am feeling. That is it. Just those 6 words. Because when you do, you create permission for dozens of others to say it too. Your honesty, your willingness to be seen in your struggle, it helps break the silence that keeps all of us isolated. So, comment below. Tell me where you are in this. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone in what you are feeling. Now, I want to go deeper into what this transition actually involves, because understanding the mechanism can help you navigate it with less suffering. What is really happening when you start seeing too much? You are developing what we might call meta-awareness. Regular awareness is when you are aware of objects in consciousness. You see a tree, you are aware of the tree. You feel sad, you are aware of the sadness. You want something, you are aware of the wanting. This is how most people operate most of the time. But meta-awareness is when you become aware of awareness itself, when you can observe the process of observing, when you notice not just what you want, but that you are wanting, not just what you feel, but that you are feeling. And this creates a fundamental shift in your relationship with experience, because now you are no longer fully identified with the contents of consciousness. There is a you that is watching the wanting, watching the feeling, watching the thoughts and sensations arise and pass, and this watching you cannot be satisfied by objects because it is not seeking anything, it is just aware. It just is. But the problem is that most of your identity, most of your sense of self, is built on being the one who wants and pursues and achieves and enjoys. That is who you think you are. So when meta-awareness starts to develop, when you start operating from this observing position, there is a death occurring. The death of the self that found meaning through pleasure and achievement. And this death is experienced as the loss of joy, because joy as you knew it required full identification with the pursuing self. It required believing that you are the one who needs things and that getting those things will complete you. But you cannot believe that anymore. You see through it. So that identity dies. And in the gap between that death and the birth of a new understanding of self, you experience this flatness, this emptiness, this inability to feel the pleasures that used to animate your life. You are in the transition. You have lost the old but have not yet fully discovered the new. This is why trying to fix the problem does not work. You cannot think your way back into innocence. You cannot force yourself to not see what you now see. Any attempt to reclaim the old pleasures through willpower just reinforces the gap, just highlights the fact that you are watching yourself try to feel joy, which is the very thing preventing the joy. It is like trying to fall asleep by trying really hard to fall asleep. The effort defeats the purpose, so what is needed is not effort, but a different kind of attention. Instead of trying to feel joy, instead of trying to reconnect with pleasure, you need to turn your attention to what is present when joy is absent. What is here, right now, in this moment, when you strip away the expectation that something should be providing you with satisfaction? What remains? This is the investigation that matters. Not how to get pleasure back, but what is true when pleasure is gone. Because what is true is that you still exist. Consciousness is still present. Life is still happening. Breath is still moving. Sensations are still occurring. And underneath all the wanting and not wanting, all the pleasure and disappointment, there is something that has never changed. Something that is not diminished by the loss of joy, not enhanced by its presence. Something that is just here, always here, the ground of being itself. But finding this requires a willingness to sit in the discomfort of nothing bringing you joy. It requires not trying to fix the problem, not trying to generate feelings that are not arising naturally, not searching for some new source of satisfaction to replace the old ones. It requires a kind of radical acceptance of what is, even when what is feels like nothing. And this is extremely difficult because your whole conditioning tells you that emptiness is a problem to solve, that lack is a sign something is wrong, that you should be doing something to restore pleasure. But what if the emptiness is not a lack but a space? What if the nothing is not absence but presence? What if what you are calling the death of joy is actually just the death of a particular story about what joy is and where it comes from? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations to look directly at your experience without the filter of interpretation, to see what is actually here when you are not telling yourself that something should be different. Arendt understood something crucial about the human condition. She understood that we exist in a paradox. We are both actors in the world, pursuing goals, making things happen, creating and destroying and shaping reality. And we are also observers, thinkers, beings capable of stepping back and examining the very activity of our acting. We are both participant and witness, and these two modes of being are in constant tension. The more you develop the witness, the observing consciousness, the harder it becomes to fully participate with the same unreflective engagement you once had. This is not a problem to solve, but a tension to navigate. You are learning to live as both at once, to act in the world while also watching yourself act, to experience without being wholly consumed by experience, to engage with life while simultaneously maintaining an awareness that sees through the temporary nature of all engagement. This is a more mature form of consciousness, but it is also a more lonely form because most people are not operating from this place. Most people are still fully identified with their roles and pursuits and pleasures, and you cannot go back to that even if you wanted to. You have crossed a threshold. So the question becomes, how do you live from this new place? How do you engage with a life that no longer provides the simple pleasures it once did? And the answer is that you stop looking for life to provide you with something. You stop expecting joy to come from experiences. You stop believing that the right circumstance or achievement or relationship will finally give you what you are seeking. Because what you are actually seeking is not something that can be given to you by anything external. What you are seeking is to know yourself as the awareness in which all experience arises, to recognize that you are not the pursuing self, but the space in which pursuit occurs. Not the one who needs joy, but the one who witnesses both joy and its absence with the same equanimity. And when you start to live from this recognition, something extraordinary happens. Not that pleasure returns in the old way, but that you stop needing it to. You discover a quality of being that is not dependent on what is happening, a kind of freedom that comes not from getting what you want, but from seeing through the wanting itself. This does not mean you become passive or disengaged. It does not mean you stop having preferences or pursuing goals. It means you do those things without the desperate need for them to provide you with your sense of okayness. You act, but you are not identified with the outcome. You enjoy things when enjoyment arises, but you do not need it to arise to be whole. You participate in life while simultaneously knowing that your fundamental nature is not touched by what happens in life. This is the paradox you are learning to embody. And it is not something you achieve through effort, but something you gradually realize through seeing what is already true. You were never the separate self seeking completion through objects and experiences. That was always a story, a construction, a way the mind organized experience. But it was never fundamentally true. What is true is that consciousness is here, has always been here, will always be here, and does not need anything to happen or not happen to be what it is. You are that consciousness, not the thoughts and feelings and sensations that arise in consciousness, but the aware presence that knows them. And this aware presence is never diminished by the absence of joy, never enhanced by its presence. It is simply what you are, before and underneath and beyond all experience. But here is the crucial point. You cannot think your way to this understanding. You cannot make it true through belief. You have to see it directly in your own experience, and you can only see it by stopping the search for it, by sitting still, by allowing the emptiness, by not trying to fill the space where joy used to be. The seeing happens in the not seeking. The finding happens in the giving up of the search. This is the ultimate paradox. What you are looking for is what is looking. And you cannot find it by looking for it because looking itself is the movement away from it. So, the loss of joy, the inability to be distracted by pleasure, is actually showing you the way. It is removing the distractions. It is making the search impossible so that you might finally stop and notice what has been here all along. The ground of being, the aware presence, the consciousness that you are and have always been. This is not a theory or a philosophy. It is something you can verify in your direct experience if you are willing to sit with what is rather than constantly seeking what could be. And yes, this is a lonely path at first, because you cannot share this with most people. They are still in pursuit mode, still believing in the narrative that fulfillment comes from external sources. They do not understand why you are not excited about the things that excite them. They worry about you, think you are depressed, suggest solutions that have nothing to do with what you are actually going through. And you cannot explain it because the experience is so interior, so subtle, so at odds with the cultural story about how life works. So you feel isolated, strange, broken. But you are not broken. You are transitioning. You are in the messy middle between the death of one way of being and the birth of another. And this middle phase is characterized by the very things you are experiencing. The loss of pleasure, the inability to be satisfied by the old rewards, the sense that something fundamental has shifted, but you do not yet know what is emerging. You are in the darkness between lights. The old lamp has gone out, and the new dawn has not yet broken. And darkness is uncomfortable, disorienting, frightening, but it is also where transformation happens, where caterpillars dissolve into butterflies, where seeds crack open in the soil, where consciousness sheds its identification with surface pleasures and begins to recognize its own deeper nature. If what I am sharing here resonates with something you have been feeling, something you have not quite been able to name, then I want you to know you are not alone in this. There are many of us exploring these questions, sitting with these uncomfortable truths, learning to see in new ways. I create these videos for people who are ready to go deeper, who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to understand rather than just feel better temporarily. If that is you, consider subscribing, not because you need another channel to follow, but because this journey of understanding yourself, of waking up to what is real, it helps to have companions along the way. People who will not offer you easy fixes but will sit with you in the questions. I will be here every week with another exploration, another perspective, another thread to pull on. And I would be honored to have you here as part of this community of seekers and thinkers. So if this feels right, hit that subscribe button. And if you found value in this particular exploration, let me know in the comments what resonated most with you. Your reflections often illuminate things I had not considered. Let me return to where we started. You sitting there watching something that used to bring you joy and feeling nothing. Or worse, feeling the absence of feeling, the void where pleasure used to be. And now you understand that this is not a defect, but a development. Not a problem, but a passage. You are transitioning from a consciousness that found meaning through pursuit and acquisition to a consciousness that is beginning to recognize its own nature as awareness itself. And this transition requires the death of the old pleasure patterns, because those patterns were keeping you distracted from the deeper investigation. As long as you could still lose yourself in enjoyment, you would keep doing it. You would keep believing that fulfillment comes from objects and experiences, but now that mechanism has broken down. And yes, it feels like a loss. It feels like something vital has been taken from you. But what has actually happened is that a distraction has been removed. The flashlight that you were shining on objects, hoping they would provide you with happiness, that flashlight is now turning back on itself. You are becoming aware of the light rather than just what the light reveals. And the light consciousness itself does not need anything to illuminate to be what it is. It is self-luminous. It is complete in itself. It does not require objects or experiences or pleasures to exist. It simply is. And you are that. Not the seeking self, not the one who wants and pursues and achieves, but the awareness in which all that seeking occurs, the still point around which everything moves. This is what seeing too much reveals. Not that life is meaningless or that pleasure is an illusion to be avoided, but that you are not who you thought you were. You are not the character in the story trying to find happiness. You are the space in which the story unfolds. The consciousness that knows the character, observes the seeking, witnesses the disappointment and the fulfillment with the same calm presence. And from this place, joy can arise again. Not the childish joy of getting what you want, but a deeper joy that has nothing to do with circumstances. A joy that is inherent in being, in consciousness itself, in the simple fact of existence. But you cannot force this joy. You cannot make it happen. You can only remove the obstacles to it, which means removing the belief that it comes from outside yourself. Removing the identification with the seeking self. Removing the story that you are incomplete and need something to complete you. And these removals happen naturally when you see through them, which is what has been occurring in you. You have started seeing too much, which means you have started seeing through the constructions that kept you in pursuit mode. And now you are in the gap between seeing through the old and fully recognizing the new. So what do you do in this gap? You sit with it. You allow the emptiness. You stop trying to restore the old pleasures or generate new ones. You stay present with what is, even when what is feels like nothing. You observe without judgment the flatness, the lack of satisfaction, the inability to be moved by things that move others. You watch it all with compassionate curiosity, and slowly, gradually, something shifts. Not that pleasure returns in the old form, but that you stop needing it to. You discover that you are okay without it, that underneath all the wanting and not wanting, underneath all the pleasure and pain, there is something that has never been touched by any of it. Something that is perfectly at ease, perfectly whole, perfectly complete, exactly as it is. And that something is not a thing. It is not an object you can grasp or a state you can achieve. It is what you are when all the layers of identification and seeking and story fall away. It is your original face before your parents were born, as the Zen masters say. It is the aware presence that has been here your entire life, but that you have been too distracted to notice because you were too busy seeking fulfillment in objects and experiences. And now the distraction has been removed. Not by your choice, not through your effort, but through the natural evolution of consciousness itself. You have grown beyond the need for distraction. You have seen too much to go back to sleep, and now you must learn to live awake. This is what I meant when I said this loss is not the end, but the beginning. The death of pleasure-seeking is the birth of something more fundamental. Not more pleasant, not more comfortable, but more true, more real, more aligned with what you actually are, rather than what you have been conditioned to believe you are. And yes, there will be times when you miss the simplicity of the old way, when you wish you could just enjoy things without seeing through them, when you envy others their unreflective engagement with life. This is natural. This is the grief of waking up. But you cannot go back, you can only go through the emptiness, through the void, through the loss of meaning and purpose and joy as you knew it, until you emerge on the other side and discover that everything you thought you had lost was only the giving up of a dream. And what remains when the dream ends is not nothing but everything. Not absence, but presence. Not lack, but fullness. The fullness of being itself, which has no content but contains all content, which needs nothing but includes everything, which is what you are and have always been, before you learn to seek yourself in the world. So the next time you sit down to do something that used to bring you joy and you feel nothing, do not turn away in disappointment. Do not judge yourself or think something is wrong. Instead, stay there. Feel the nothing. Observe the flatness. Notice the absence of pleasure without trying to create it, and in that noticing, in that staying with what is rather than seeking what could be, you might catch a glimpse of something that has been here all along. A quality of presence that does not depend on what is present. A kind of peace that has nothing to do with whether you are enjoying yourself or not. A sense of okayness that is not earned or achieved, but simply revealed when you stop demanding that life provide you with satisfaction. This is what seeing too much makes possible. Not more pleasure, but something deeper than pleasure. Not more joy, but something that does not come and go like joy. Not fulfillment in the conventional sense, but the recognition that you were never unfulfilled in the first place, that the sense of lack was always a misperception, a case of mistaken identity. You thought you were the one who needed something, but you are the space in which need arises and passes, and space is never made smaller by what moves through it, never diminished by what it contains. It remains what it is, vast and open and complete, regardless of what appears or disappears within it. This is your true nature. Not the seeking self, but the aware space in which seeking occurs. And when you recognize this, when you see it directly in your own experience, the question of why nothing brings you joy anymore becomes irrelevant. Because you realize you are the joy you were seeking, not as a feeling but as the very fabric of being itself, always here, always whole, never dependent on anything to make it what it is. And in that recognition, everything changes. Not the world, not your circumstances, not what brings you pleasure or what does not, but you, the one who thought they needed the world to be a certain way, the one who thought fulfillment came from outside. That one dissolves, like a dream character waking to find they were never separate from the dreamer. And what remains is simply what is, always has been, will always be. Consciousness knowing itself. Awareness aware of awareness. Being, without need, without lack. Without the endless pursuit of something to complete what was never incomplete. This is the gift of seeing too much, not the burden you think it is, but the doorway you needed. Welcome home.